We're seeing the second highest cancellation rate on record for April. We're talking about that today, as well as what's going on here in Phoenix, because we are seeing that every property type is seeing a cool down year over year. The prices are being affected, and in particular, that condo townhome market is feeling a little chilly. So we're going to talk about what that looks like. Thanks for joining me this week, you guys. Let's get into it. U.S. home purchases were canceled at the second highest April rate on record. This is according to Redfin. So this is national news. But the reason April is significant is because April is usually a higher sales month for the housing market across the board. In Phoenix, obviously, it's a hot time of year for us because the weather is nice. We have a lot of visitors here seasonally. People enjoy Phoenix around that time before it gets hot. But other areas of the country where it's cooler, the spring buying and selling season is a strong time as well because weather is finally warming up and getting into maybe a busier summer season. 1 in 7 home purchase agreements fell through last month. The share was higher in many parts of Florida, which is home to 5 of the 10 metros with the highest cancellation rates. Redfin agents say that when a deal is on shaky ground, it can be an opportunity to outbid buyers to get in backup offer position. Well, that would be great if we had a lot of demand, but the fact of the matter is our demand is not super strong right now. So unless you are a buyer that feels like you're not finding a lot of options out there, which that does exist, most of the time you have a lot of options. And so if something's under contract, you're moving on to something else. But they're saying roughly 56,000 U.S. home purchase agreements were canceled in April, which is equal to 14.3% of homes that went under contract that month. That's up from 13.5% a year earlier, and it's the highest April share in records dating back to 2017, with the exception of April of 2020, which we all know what happened there. So we're seeing buyers start to kind of back out of these purchases. Now, whether or not it's, that they are going to find something else or that they've just decided now is not the right time and they have some concerns and cold feet, we don't know that information. We don't get the reason as to why they're canceling. And honestly, here in Phoenix, I don't really have a way to see which purchases were canceled other than looking at homes that came back on market. But that's not the most accurate way to look at it. So for now, we're taking that news from Redfin. They also had another article that came out. New listings hit highest level in nearly 3 years. Now, this is not a surprise. We've been talking about the active listing counts here in Phoenix every single week. We know the inventory is high out there. But this news report is saying that new listings of U.S. homes for sale rose 8.4% year over year to the highest level in nearly 3 years during the 4 weeks that ended May 18th. But buyers aren't biting. Pending sales fell 2.2%, dropping to the lowest level for this time of year in our records, which dates back to 2015. And mortgage purchase applications are down 5% week over week. So, moral of the story, nationally, we're seeing a lot of new listings. We are seeing, pending home sales decreasing, meaning buyer demand not really keeping strong. And then, that mortgage purchase application data, meaning that's that intent of buyers out there, that is also down 5% week over week. They said that the uptick in listings and decline in sales are causing an inventory pileup. Not new news to us. That's what we've been talking about. The total number of homes for sale rose 14.3% year over year to the highest level in nearly 5 years. We're going to take a look at what's going on with inventory here in Phoenix in just a second. But I also wanted to share that Redfin is reporting that home prices will dip 1% by the end of 2025. So we're getting close to mid-year. There had been a lot of forecasts at the beginning of the year from Zillow and other outlets like that about what's going to happen with home prices this year. And most of them were either somewhat neutral, maybe a little bit of positive. And now we're seeing a lot of them start to forecast more of a decline. So Redfin saying a dip by 1% by the end of the year. And they're forecasting that mortgage rates will stay elevated near 7%. Wah, wah. It's not the best news. Redfin economists expect the median U.S. home sales price to fall flat in the third quarter and fall 1% year over year. by the fourth quarter. Now, that's not a huge dip. That's not too exciting if you're waiting for home prices to come down. But remember, this is Redfin looking, nationally. Every submarket could behave a little bit differently. And we've already seen prices start to come down here in Phoenix, and we're kind of continuing that trend. So I would expect that this would be a little bit more of an aggressive forecast for Phoenix if they were looking just at that market in particular. So where do we stand with our active listings here in Phoenix? Well, the last couple of weeks haven't been super exciting. We're not seeing this climb that we had seen before, but we're also not seeing a dip around 26,708. But what I thought was interesting, it's been a few weeks since we've checked the new listings by month. And if you take a look at where we're at in May, we've added 7,195 new listings. We only have a few more days left in this week. And every single month we've been beating last year with new listings. But for May, last year was 8,671. I don't know if we're going to get enough added this month to actually surpass what we saw last year. And that will break the trend for the first time this year. So we'll keep an eye on new listings. We'll check back on this next week if they have all of the data updated for us. We'll know if May changed the course of adding new listings or, if we're still on track with what we've been seeing all year. Now, speaking of interest rates, there are some that are calling out Powell and telling him he needs to lower interest rates. So in particular, the FHFA director, Pulte, calls on Powell to lower interest rates. These are the three reasons the Trump administration is doing a full court press on Powell. So this happened on Monday. Trump does not have the power to remove Powell from his position. And so some other folks out there are being more outspoken on Powell lowering interest rates and or, saying that he should step away from his position. Bill Pulte called on Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to lower interest rates. His tweet was, Jay Powell needs to lower interest rates. Enough is enough. President Trump has crushed Biden's inflation and there's no reason not to lower rates. The housing market would be in much better shape if Chairman Powell does this. So, not really holding back on that statement. We know how he feels about that. So one of the concerns about rates is that housing construction is near COVID-19 levels, recession levels, and this is concerning because this is all affected by builder confidence, right? So builder confidence, as we talked about last week, they're not going to continue to pull permits and build more homes if they don't feel confident about buyer activity out there. And buyers are not coming out of the woodwork to buy when rates are where they're at. Of course, that's also in combination with prices, but this is focusing on rates. They're also saying fighting a trade war is easier with lower rates as well. They say the trade war drama has made the bond market check the White House at times, and the president believes it'll be easier if rates are lower. This is why I think we might see a potential shadow Fed president, where Trump will showcase his next Fed president in a media tour to talk the markets into lower rates. This is something Besant brought up in October of 2024. So a lot going on with the Fed, with rates, and how this is affecting the housing market right now. There's certainly conversation around that. Rates aren't looking too hot. If you take a look here, we have been above 7% last week, 7.08%, which we hadn't seen in a bit. As of now, we're at about 7.02%. We had a holiday this week, so markets were closed on Monday, so getting kind of a slower start to the week. But keep an eye on that. Of course, as I always say, if you're trying to avoid today's interest rates, consider purchasing a property with an assumable mortgage. They are not plentiful out there, but they do exist. And so if you're curious on what that process looks like, you can either set up a discovery call with our team or check the description below for a link to search homes with assumable mortgages. Now, I mentioned that we are seeing every property type in Phoenix cooling off year over year. So Let's take a look at what's going on there. And by the way, if any of this is helpful for you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'd love to see you here every single week learning about what's going on in the real estate market with me. So according to the Cromford report, here is a table showing the different types of properties and the contract ratio from last year to this year. And you can see that every single one has a negative annual change. Now, if you aren't familiar with the contract ratio, it is basically comparing the number of homes that are on the market in a particular area and how many of those homes are actually available versus under contract. So when we have more homes for sale versus what's under contract, obviously there's more supply. That leans more towards a buyer's market that's weaker for sellers. That's generally a cooler market. But then when we have a area where we're seeing more homes under contract than are actually available for sale, that means that we have a hotter market and more of a seller advantage there because buyers don't have as many choices. So when we look at the contract ratio last year for single family homes, we were at 56.7. This year we're at 38.1, a very clear decrease on that contract ratio. Apartments actually saw a 55% decrease year over year from 47 contract ratio last year to 21 today. Townhomes, another one that I said is kind of suffering a little bit. 53 last year, 27 this year, a 48% decrease in that contract ratio for those types of properties. And you'll see we're seeing a similar decrease with other types of properties as well. 48% decrease, 30% decrease, patio homes and mobile homes as well. What is seeing the most effect here is the market for apartments. Or basically condos, right? So they're saying that that's declined the most. A contract ratio of 21 is very low, meaning there's far too much supply and demand is unusually weak. In many of these cases, there may be additional concern about issues that might affect the community as a whole, not just the subject property. So they're referencing HOAs there. There's been a lot going on with HOAs, not necessarily having the reserves needed, some concerns about that across the board. And so I think that is something that has made, condos a little bit of a weaker market here. They go on to talk about why, because insurance costs have escalated faster than inflation for condos and apartments. And the cover taken out by the HOA sometimes is too skimpy to satisfy the potential lender. So we've experienced this with our team recently with some clients selling a condo or townhome where the loan process is challenging. The buyer isn't necessarily getting approval without increasing insurance coverage at that complex. So things can be a little bit sticky with condos and townhomes, especially in this environment. And so it's not really a surprise to me to see that this is kind of weakened a little bit. So you can see this reflected in the prices, the sales price per square foot for condos and townhomes, $236, whereas, not too long ago, just in February, March, it was $270, and it hasn't been this low since November of 2023, it looks like, just right around that same point. And then prior to that, back in September of 2022. So we've definitely seen prices start to come down in that condo townhome market. Now, there's been a bit of a shakeup with the CMI. We are seeing Chandler lose its top spot when we look at all of the major cities throughout Phoenix. Chandler's been holding strong as being the hottest of any market, if we want to consider it that, because everything is relatively weak right now. But Fountain Hills has taken over. It went up 6% month over month. Now, if you're not familiar with this, this is not prices. This is related to the Cromford Market Index, meaning really supply and demand factors, whether or not these markets are a buyer's market, seller's market, or a balanced market. So Fountain Hills, Chandler, and Avondale are all technically in a seller's market, but are all very, very weak. But Fountain Hills gained some steam over the last month and bumped Chandler out of that number one spot. Now, depending what city you're at in the valley, whether you're considering buying there or selling there, every city is behaving a little bit differently. We have a lot of cities that are in a balanced market and in a buyer's market, and just a few that are in that seller's market. If you are someone considering selling your home in one of these areas and just want to get an idea of what your home could sell for, I have a link below for an instant home valuation. You can click on that for more information. Now, the CMI overall is 73.6. We're still hanging out in this buyer's market. Demand really hasn't moved that much. It's been around 80 for a few weeks now, but we do still see supply creeping up ever so slightly. So supply is 9% above normal. Demand is 20% below normal. Obviously, a big gap there where supply is outpacing demand, which is why we're in a buyer's market across the board. And if we look at the contract ratio, this is basically a heat map throughout the valley of every zip code and where this contract ratio is at with each zip code. So some zip codes being hotter than others. Again, this is letting us know, how many homes are available for sale in that area and how many are actually under contract. The yellow zip codes are a little bit warmer. So we see some in the East Valley, some in North Phoenix, and then a couple in the West Valley. The green is a little bit more of that like balanced warm area, and then blue is on the colder side. So a mix of everything. If you're curious what the contract ratio is in your zip code, check the description below. You can request that information there. I am very interested to see where our new listings data takes us next week and how May shakes out to see if we are breaking a trend, because it certainly seems like listings coming to the market this month was just a little bit slower than we've been seeing all year long. So you'll have to come back next week to check that out. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you guys all next Wednesday on the next market update.